Most people believe buying a ranch means gaining land. Jack Carter discovered. Sometimes you inherit someone else's unfinished promise. Autumn arrived early across the Wyoming frontier in 1888. Cold winds swept through the rolling grasslands. Dry leaves drifted across the wagon trail leading towards Silver Creek. 35-year-old Jack Carter tightened the reins as his wagon climbed the final hill. Everything he owned fit inside that weathered wagon. A few tools. Several blankets. His father's old rifle. And a folded deed to a forgotten ranch. 2 months earlier, his father had passed away after a long illness. Before taking his final breath, he had spoken only one request. Don't let the Carter Ranch disappear. Jack had promised. Even though he had never planned to return. He remembered the place from childhood. A lonely cabin. A collapsing barn. Wide pastures stretching beyond the horizon. After his mother died, his father rarely smiled again. The ranch slowly fell apart. Eventually, he sold most of the cattle and left. No one in town understood why. Now, Jack had come back hoping to begin again. As he reached the entrance, the wooden gate hung crooked on one hinge. The fence leaned inward. Tall grass covered the wagon path. This is going to take months, he murmured. He guided his horse through the open gate. The silence felt unusual. No livestock. No barking dogs. Not even birds. Only the wind moving through the cottonwood trees. Jack stepped down from the wagon. He walked toward the old cabin. The porch creaked beneath his boots. Dust covered the windows. He reached for the door. The handle turned easily. The door slowly opened. Jack expected darkness. Instead, warm light spilled across the wooden floor. He froze. A kettle rested above a burning stove. Fresh bread cooled on the table. 3 bowls had been carefully arranged. Someone was living here. Before Jack could speak, a calm female voice came from inside. Please close the door. The wind carries dust. Jack slowly turned. 3 Chinese women looked up from the dinner table. The oldest appeared to be around 28. She wore a simple cream-colored dress with a dark apron. Long black hair rested neatly over one shoulder. Her expression remained composed. Beside her sat a younger woman repairing a torn shirt. Across from them, the youngest quietly peeled apples into a wooden bowl. None of them looked frightened. None of them reached for a weapon. It was as though they had expected someone to arrive one day. Jack broke the silence. Who are you? The oldest woman stood. She offered a respectful nod. My name is May. She motioned toward the others. My sisters are Lin and Xiao. Jack looked around the room. This ranch belongs to me now. May nodded gently. We know. You know. She answered without hesitation. We've been waiting. Those words unsettled him more than finding strangers inside the cabin. Jack frowned. Waiting for who? For a Carter. The room became quiet again. Jack studied their faces. There was no panic. No anger. Only patience. He placed the folded deed on the table. I purchased this property legally. I have every right to live here. May glanced at the document. We never questioned that. Jack crossed his arms. Then why are you still here? Lin lowered her sewing. Xiao quietly looked toward her older sister. May took a slow breath. Because your father asked us to stay. Jack's eyes narrowed. My father? She nodded. He said one day, his son would return. And when he did, we must give him something. Jack felt his heartbeat quicken. My father never mentioned any of this. He wasn't ready. May walked toward an old bookshelf standing beside the fireplace. She knelt. Reached behind the bottom shelf. Then carefully removed a small iron box covered in dust. A rusted brass lock still hung from the front. From around her neck, she lifted a worn leather cord. Attached to it was an old key. She held it out toward Jack. He trusted us to keep this safe. Jack accepted the key. The cold metal felt surprisingly heavy. What's inside? May met his eyes. We've never opened it. It was never ours. Jack slowly unlocked the box. The hinges groaned. Inside rested only 3 things. A faded photograph. An old silver pocket watch. And a sealed envelope. Across the front, written in his father's unmistakable handwriting, were 6 simple words. For my son, Jack Carter only. Jack stared at the envelope. His hands trembled slightly. Whatever waited inside had been hidden for many years. And somehow, 3 strangers had protected it all this time. Jack carefully lifted the envelope from the iron box. Dust drifted through the warm light beside the fireplace. For several seconds, he simply stared at his father's handwriting. The letters looked exactly as he remembered. Strong. Steady. Honest. The same handwriting that had once taught him how to write his own name. He slowly broke the wax seal. Inside rested 3 handwritten pages. A small photograph slipped onto the table. Jack picked it up. His breathing stopped. The picture showed his father standing beside 3 young Chinese girls. The oldest could not have been older than 16. She held the hands of 2 frightened children. Jack looked toward May. Then back at the photograph. It was you. May quietly nodded. Yes. Jack unfolded the first page. His father's voice almost seemed to return through the words. My son. If you are reading this, then I am already gone. Jack swallowed hard. He continued reading. Before you judge these women, you deserve to know why they are here. 20 years ago, I found 3 sisters abandoned beside an overturned freight wagon after an attack on a supply caravan. Their parents never survived. They had nowhere left to go. Jack slowly lowered the paper. He looked toward the sisters. None of them interrupted. His father's letter continued. I could not leave children alone on the prairie. So I brought them home. I promised their parents they would always have a roof over their heads. Jack turned to the second page. They never asked me for money. They never treated this ranch as their own. They earned every meal with honest work. Jack remembered something. As a boy, he often wondered why his father sometimes disappeared for weeks during cattle drives. Now, many missing pieces finally fit together. His father had been protecting someone. Not hiding a secret. Protecting a promise. Jack finished the final page. Son. If these women are still here, please don't send them away before hearing their story. A person's greatest wealth is never land. It is keeping the promises that define who they are. The cabin fell completely silent. Jack folded the letter carefully. His father had left him a ranch. But he had also left him a responsibility. After several quiet moments, Jack finally spoke. Why didn't any of you leave? Lynn answered first. Our parents asked us to trust Mr. Carter. Xiao smiled softly. We never wanted anything else. May added quietly, when your father became sick, we offered to care for him. He refused. He said you deserved the chance to choose freely. Jack looked around the cabin. Everything suddenly appeared different. The polished floor. The repaired curtains. The neatly stacked firewood beside the stove. Nothing here had happened by accident. These women had spent years protecting a place that legally wasn't theirs. Yet they had cared for it as though it belonged to family. Jack stood and walked outside. Cool autumn air filled his lungs. His thoughts raced. Half of him wanted to honor his father's final wish. The other half questioned whether four strangers could truly live together beneath one roof. Footsteps sounded behind him. It was May. She stood several feet away, giving him space. "You don't have to decide today." Jack looked toward the distant hills. "What if I fail him?" May understood immediately. "You mean your father?" Jack nodded. "He believed I could save this ranch. I don't even know where to begin." May looked across the neglected fields. "The fences need repairing. The well should be cleaned. The north pasture hasn't been planted in years." Jack glanced at her. "You know all of that?" She smiled gently. "We've been taking care of what we could. But 3 people cannot rebuild an entire ranch alone." For the first time, Jack realized something important. They didn't expect him to rescue them. They wanted to help him save the ranch. That evening, the 4 of them shared dinner together. The atmosphere remained quiet, yet no longer uncomfortable. Xiao placed fresh bread onto Jack's plate. "You should eat more. Tomorrow will be a long day." Jack almost smiled. Lynn unfolded a rough map of the property. She pointed toward several damaged fences. "I marked everything that needs attention." Jack looked surprised. "You made this?" She nodded. "So your work will be easier." Even May seemed slightly embarrassed. "We hoped someone from the Carter family would eventually return. So we prepared." Jack slowly looked around the table. For years, he believed he had inherited an abandoned ranch. The truth: he had inherited 3 people who had never stopped believing his family would come home. The following morning, before sunrise, Jack walked outside carrying a hammer over one shoulder. He expected to begin repairing the broken corral alone. Instead, he found 3 horses already saddled. May adjusted the straps on one. Lynn carried lumber toward the fence. Xiao balanced a toolbox nearly half her size. Jack laughed quietly. "I didn't ask for help." May looked back with a calm smile. "You didn't need to. Families don't wait to be asked." Jack froze for a moment. No one had called him family since the day his father died. Just then, the sound of galloping horses echoed across the valley. 3 armed riders approached through the front gate. Their leader wore an expensive black coat and carried official documents beneath one arm. He pulled his horse to a stop. His eyes swept across the ranch, then settled on Jack. "So, you must be the new owner." He smiled. "I'm afraid there's something you need to know." He slowly unfolded the papers. "This land may not belong to you after all." The morning air suddenly felt much colder. Jack stepped away from the corral. His hammer remained in one hand. Across the yard, 3 mounted men waited without moving. The rider in the middle wore a tailored black coat instead of ranch clothes. His boots were polished. His gloves looked untouched by honest work. Everything about him suggested wealth, not labor. He slowly climbed down from his horse. "My name is Charles Whitmore. I represent the High Plains Land Company." Jack kept his eyes on the folded documents. "What do you want?" Charles smiled politely. "I came to prevent an unfortunate mistake." He unfolded several yellowed papers. "The ranch you're standing on Was included in an unpaid loan nearly 15 years ago. Jack frowned. My father owned this land. So he believed. Charles handed one document forward. But according to these records, the debt was never fully settled. Jack studied the papers. Official seals covered the bottom corners. Everything looked convincing. Before he could respond, Lynn quietly stepped beside him. She glanced at the faded signatures. Something immediately caught her attention. She leaned closer. Then whispered, "Something is wrong." Jack looked at her. "You can read this?" Lynn nodded. "I've kept your father's account books for years. The dates don't match." Charles overheard the conversation. His smile disappeared. "I'm afraid bookkeeping and property law are very different matters." Jack folded the document and returned it. "I'll have my own lawyer review everything." Charles accepted the papers calmly. "Of course. But while ownership remains disputed, you shouldn't spend money repairing buildings that may soon belong to someone else." His eyes slowly moved toward the cabin. Then toward the three sisters. "I assume these women know they'll have to leave as well." No one answered. Charles placed his gloves back on. "I'll return in 1 week. I suggest thinking carefully." Without another word, the three riders turned around. Dust followed them down the trail. Only after they disappeared beyond the hill did Jack finally release the breath he had been holding. The ranch had barely become his responsibility. Now, it might already be slipping away. Inside the cabin, the four gathered around the kitchen table. Jack spread out every document he owned. His father's deed. Tax receipts. Old maps. Nothing explained the papers Charles had presented. Lynn quietly opened another wooden chest beneath the window. She removed several notebooks tied together with leather cord. Jack looked surprised. "What are those?" "Your father's records. He asked me to organize them every winter." She carefully turned the pages. Every expense had been written by hand. Every cattle sale. Every fence repair. Every tax payment. Nothing appeared missing. Then, Lynn suddenly stopped. She pointed toward a page dated 12 years earlier. "Look here." Jack leaned closer. One payment stood out. A very large amount had been transferred to the High Plains Land Company. The note beside it simply read, "Final settlement." Jack looked confused. If he paid everything, then why would Charles claim otherwise? Lynn slowly closed the ledger. "Either your father was deceived, or someone wants this ranch badly enough to lie." Silence filled the room. May finally spoke. "I don't think this is about old debt." Jack looked at her. "What do you mean?" She walked toward the window. Beyond the fields, morning sunlight reflected across a narrow stream cutting through the property. When surveyors visited 2 years ago, they spent an entire afternoon studying the north pasture. I asked why. They wouldn't answer. Jack frowned. "You never mentioned that." "I didn't think it mattered. Now, I believe it does." That afternoon, Jack rode toward town hoping to learn more. Ben Harper was repairing a wagon outside the blacksmith shop. The moment he saw Jack, he knew something was wrong. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Jack told him everything. Ben's smile disappeared. So Whitmore finally made his move. "You know him?" "Everybody does." Ben lowered his voice. "He buys struggling ranches. If people refuse to sell, they somehow lose them." Jack folded his arms. "Can he actually do that?" "Not legally. But proving it, that's another story." Jack stared toward the courthouse. I won't let him take my father's land. Ben placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Then don't fight alone. Back at the ranch, May stood near the vegetable garden gathering fresh herbs. Jack watched quietly for a moment before walking over. I'm sorry. She looked up. For what? You've spent years protecting this place. And now you're facing another uncertain future because of me. May smiled gently. No. We're facing it together. Jack hesitated. I can't promise we'll win. She handed him a small bundle of lavender. My father once told me. A storm doesn't ask whether we're ready. It only asks whether we'll stand together. Jack looked at the flowers in his hand. Then at May. For the first time, he understood why his father had trusted her so completely. It wasn't because she was strong. It was because she made everyone around her stronger. That evening, as the four of them shared another quiet supper, laughter unexpectedly returned to the table. Xiao accidentally burned a loaf of bread. Lin teased her. Even Jack laughed. The ranch no longer felt like strangers living beneath one roof. It felt like a family protecting the same dream. Later that night, unable to sleep, Jack walked into the old barn carrying a lantern. He searched through dusty shelves hoping to find anything connected to his father's business. Most of the crates held broken tools, rusted horseshoes, old harnesses. Then, behind a loose wooden plank, his lantern revealed a narrow hidden compartment. Inside rested a weathered leather folder. Across the front, his father's handwriting appeared once again. Property records, do not destroy. Jack slowly reached for the folder. If the truth still existed anywhere, it was waiting inside. Moonlight filtered through the cracks of the old barn. Dust floated lazily through the lantern's glow. Jack carefully lifted the weathered leather folder from the hidden compartment. The leather had become stiff with age. Its edges were worn smooth by countless hands. He carried it back to the cabin without opening it. Some discoveries deserved witnesses. The next morning, the four of them gathered around the kitchen table. Coffee steamed from simple tin cups. No one spoke. Jack untied the faded leather strap. Inside lay dozens of carefully preserved documents. Land surveys, tax receipts, bank correspondence, old maps. Everything had been organized in perfect order. Lin quietly began sorting the papers by date. Several minutes passed. Then, she suddenly stopped. There. Jack looked up. What did you find? Lin slid one document across the table. It was an official receipt from the Territorial Land Office. Stamped. Signed. And dated 14 years earlier. Across the bottom, one sentence immediately caught Jack's attention. Mortgage paid in full. He frowned. This proves my father settled everything. Lin nodded. But there's more. She unfolded another sheet hidden beneath it. It was a letter from the bank. The manager confirmed the loan had been completely cleared. No additional claims could legally be made against the property. Jack slowly leaned back. So Charles lied. May gently shook her head. I don't think he lied. I think someone hoped these papers had disappeared forever. The room became silent again. Jack looked toward the old folder. His father had hidden the documents. Not because he doubted the truth. Because he feared someone would try to erase it. That afternoon, Jack rode into Silver Creek carrying the entire folder inside his saddlebag. Ben Harper met him outside the courthouse. You found something. Jack smiled for the first time in days. I found everything. Together, they entered the county clerk's office. The elderly clerk carefully examined every page. Nearly an hour passed. Finally, he removed his glasses. There is no legal dispute. He looked directly at Jack. These records are genuine. The Carter Ranch belongs to you. Jack felt an enormous weight disappear from his shoulders. The clerk continued. I'll prepare a formal declaration immediately. Word spread through town before sunset. By evening, everyone already knew Charles Whitmore's claim had collapsed. 3 days later, Charles returned exactly as promised. His confident smile vanished the moment Jack handed him the certified declaration. Charles read the document twice. His jaw tightened. This isn't over. Jack remained calm. It already is. Charles folded the paper slowly. Then climbed onto his horse. Without another word, he and his riders disappeared down the valley. No one ever saw them return to Silver Creek again. That evening, the ranch felt different. Not because anything had changed physically, but because uncertainty had finally left. Jack walked across the pasture as the sun began to set. He found May repairing a small section of fence. You don't have to work tonight. She smiled. I know. I wanted to. They continued walking together. Neither hurried. The prairie stretched endlessly before them. Golden light covered the tall grass. After a long silence, May finally spoke. When you first opened that cabin door, I packed my things before you even asked. Jack looked surprised. You did? She nodded. I thought we would lose another home. She lowered her eyes. I've become used to leaving. Jack stopped walking. You'll never have to pack because of me. May looked into his eyes. She saw no hesitation. Only sincerity. For the first time, she believed him completely. A gentle breeze carried the scent of wild sage across the field. Jack reached down and picked a small wildflower growing beside the path. He offered it to her. I don't have much experience giving flowers. May accepted it with a quiet laugh. I don't think anyone has ever given me one. It seemed unfair. She carefully tucked the flower into her hair. You know, my father once said, the smallest gifts often stay in the heart the longest. Jack smiled. I think your father was a wise man. He was. He would have liked you. Those simple words warmed Jack more than the evening sun. Back at the cabin, Xiao and Lin watched through the kitchen window. Xiao grinned. They're walking very slowly. Lin smiled knowingly. People only walk that slowly when they hope the road never ends. Both sisters quietly stepped away from the window before Jack and May returned. Neither wanted to interrupt a moment that belonged only to them. Later that night, Jack climbed into the attic searching for an old blanket. Instead, he noticed a small cedar chest tucked beneath the rafters. Inside rested a velvet pouch. He opened it carefully. A simple silver ring lay inside. Beneath it, his father's handwriting appeared once again. For the woman who finally teaches you what home truly means. Jack stood completely still. His father had never met May as the woman she would become in Jack's life. Yet somehow, he had believed his son would one day find someone worth waiting for. Jack closed the box gently. A quiet smile crossed his face. The answer had been standing beside him for months. He simply hadn't recognized it soon enough. Looking through the attic window, he saw May below watering the small garden beside the cabin. The fading sunlight rested softly across her face. Jack whispered to himself. I don't want you to stay because of my father's promise. I want you to stay because of ours. As he tightened his hand around the velvet pouch, he made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. The first snowfall arrived earlier than anyone expected. A thin blanket of white covered the Carter ranch. The fences stood straight once again. Fresh paint brightened the old barn. Smoke rose peacefully from the cabin chimney. Just a few months earlier, Jack had inherited a forgotten piece of land. Now, he looked across the ranch and no longer saw abandoned buildings. He saw a home. Every corner carried someone's care. Lynn had transformed the neglected garden into rows of vegetables that would feed the ranch through winter. Xiao had filled the once silent cabin with laughter, warm bread, and songs that echoed through the evenings. May, without ever asking for recognition, had become the quiet heart holding everything together. One afternoon, Jack rode into town alone. He stopped outside the small jewelry shop. The elderly owner looked up from his workbench. "I haven't seen you here in years." Jack smiled. "I've come for something important." He carefully placed the silver ring his father had left on the counter. "I'd like you to polish it." The old jeweler gently turned the ring beneath the light. "This belonged to your mother." Jack nodded. "I think it's time." The old man smiled knowingly. "I've been wondering when you would finally realize." 2 weeks later, Silver Creek gathered at the Carter Ranch for its annual harvest festival. Families arrived with wagons full of food. Children chased one another through the open pasture. Neighbors admired the ranch that many had once believed would never recover. Ben Harper stood beside Jack holding 2 cups of coffee. "You've done your father proud." Jack slowly shook his head. "We did." He looked toward the barn. Lynn laughed while helping several children decorate the fence with ribbons. Xiao taught a little girl how to braid fresh flowers. May quietly arranged homemade bread on a long wooden table. No one noticed how naturally everyone worked together. Because it already felt like a family. As sunset painted the prairie gold, Ben gently nudged Jack's shoulder. "If you're going to do it, now is the moment." Jack smiled. "I know." He walked toward the center of the gathering. Then raised his hand. The conversation slowly faded. Every face turned toward him. Even May looked puzzled. Jack took one slow breath. "When I first arrived here, I believed I had purchased an old ranch." Soft laughter spread through the crowd. "I was wrong." He looked directly at May. "What I truly received was a second chance." May's eyes never left his. Jack continued. "My father left me this land. But he left me something far more valuable. He trusted 3 remarkable women. Long before I understood why." He reached into his coat. The familiar velvet pouch rested inside. Jack removed the polished silver ring. Then, without another word, he lowered himself onto one knee. The entire ranch became silent. Even the children stopped running. Jack looked up at May. "When I opened the cabin door, I saw strangers. Today, I see the person I cannot imagine living without." A tear slipped down May's cheek. Jack smiled softly. "You once stayed here because of a promise made by my father. I don't want you staying because of his promise anymore. I want you to stay because of mine." He opened the small ring box. "May, will you make this ranch our home? As my wife?" For a few beautiful seconds, May could not speak. She remembered the frightened young girl who had first stepped onto this property with nowhere else to go. She remembered Mr. Carter. The kindness he had shown. The promise he had protected. Now, his son stood before her with the very same heart. May slowly stepped forward. She gently wiped away the tears on Jack's face before he even realized they were there. Then she smiled. The same quiet smile that had first welcomed him inside the cabin months earlier. Yes. Not because I need a place to stay. She placed her hand in his. But because you have already become my home. Applause erupted across the ranch. Ben laughed louder than anyone. Mrs. Harper wiped away happy tears. Even old ranchers who rarely showed emotion removed their hats with quiet respect. Lynn walked toward her sister first. She wrapped May in a long embrace. Our parents would be smiling today. Xiao joined them moments later. So would Mr. Carter. Jack slipped the silver ring onto May's finger. It fit perfectly. Almost as though it had been waiting all those years for this exact moment. As the celebration continued, Thunder wandered across the pasture. The magnificent black stallion stopped beside Jack and gently lowered his head toward May. She smiled and stroked his neck. You remember. Thunder answered with a soft breath. The crowd laughed warmly. Ben shook his head. I still can't believe the fiercest horse in Wyoming obeys only one person. Jack smiled. He doesn't obey her. He chooses her. As darkness settled over the valley, lanterns illuminated the ranch with a warm golden glow. Music floated through the crisp evening air. Children danced. Neighbors shared stories. Laughter replaced every lonely memory the old ranch had once carried. Late that night, Jack and May stood together on the front porch. The celebration slowly faded behind them. Snowflakes drifted quietly across the open fields. Jack looked toward the repaired barn. I thought I came here to rebuild a ranch. May gently rested her head against his shoulder. What did you actually rebuild? Jack smiled. My life. Far below the porch, Lin and Xiao stood talking beside the garden. They were no longer guests. No longer refugees. No longer women waiting for someone else's decision. They belonged. Exactly where they were. Jack looked up at the endless Wyoming sky. At last, he fully understood the final lesson hidden inside his father's letter. A ranch can be inherited. A house can be repaired. Land can be bought. But a home is built by the people who choose to protect one another. And sometimes, the greatest inheritance a parent leaves behind is not property. It is the chance to become the kind of person worthy of calling others family.